Pam, you can go ahead.
Thank you, Kavita. Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining our webinar, How to Use ONN's New Sector Data for Provincial Advocacy. I know many folks are still trickling in, but we'll sort of get started so we can go through all the slides we have for you today. My name is Pamela Upal Sandhu. I use she, her pronouns, and I'm the policy director here at ONN. And if you're new to ONN, a little bit about us, welcome. We are the provincial network for Ontario's 58,000 nonprofits and charities focused on policy, advocacy, and services to strengthen Ontario's nonprofit sector as a key pillar of our society and economy. If you are already a member of ONN, welcome back and thank you for your support. Our public policy research and advocacy would not be possible without you. Couple of logistical pieces. So if you experience any tech difficulties during the webinar, you can type the issue into the chat box and our team, Kavita and Ovish, will respond as soon as possible. We encourage you to ask questions throughout our webinar today through the Q&A box or even in the chat. Our team is monitoring it. We do have time at the end of the webinar, about 15 minutes for Q&A, so we'll have some time to discuss then as well. You're also welcome to share comments and learnings on social media if you're on social media. To answer a most common question, you will receive an email with the recording, slides, and resources in 1 week post-webinar. To ground our webinar today, I want to begin with acknowledging that we are meeting on unceded and unsurrendered land that has been inhabited by the Indigenous peoples from time immemorial. The ONN office is located on the traditional territory of the Wendat, the Haudenosaunee, and the Mississaugas of the Credit. This territory is part of the Dish with One Spoon Treaty and is also covered by the Upper Canada Treaties. This is also where I'm joining you from today as well. At ONN, we believe that as nonprofits, we must take seriously our role in responding to the Truth and Reconciliation Commission's 94 calls to action. I also want to take some time personally to acknowledge and hold space for another land-based conflict and the unimaginable loss of life over the past couple of weeks in Palestine and Israel, and wanting to just acknowledge that and hold that into our hearts and know that's heavy for many of the folks that work in our sector, that are part of our sector, and the communities that we serve as well here in Ontario. Quick agenda and roadmap for today. We're really excited to share all of our survey resources, and we'll sort of share line by line what all of them mean, how you can use them. My colleague Ebony will walk us through our 4-year trends, a bit of analysis why we think these trends are happening in this moment and why they've happened over the past 4 years, as well as what our provincial recommendations for advocacy are. And then we'll move into how you can leverage and use our data for your own advocacy efforts. We'll share a couple of different ways, walk you through some data sheets. And then we have our partner from OTF, Marius, joining, who will walk us through the public dashboard, which is new this year. It's bilingual, and he'll sort of walk us through how to use it, what some information you can get out of that, and how that can complement your advocacy work as well. And then we'll have some time for some Q&A. And as I shared, please feel free to drop questions, comments throughout the webinar, and we will try to get to them as best as we can. Oh, and before I go into this, I also want to quickly thank OTF, the Definity Foundation, and community researchers for their support on our survey project this year. It truly takes a whole village to do this survey and a cross-team effort. And so really, really thankful and grateful for everyone who has supported us on this. So this is our 4th annual State of the Sector survey. For those of you who have been part of ONN for many, many years, you'll know that we started doing this survey during the pandemic in 2020. And honestly, at that point, we had no plans of doing this year after year. It really was, we were hearing from the sector that they're really being impacted by the pandemic. So are the communities that they're serving. And we needed to gather data fast to figure out what were those impacts, what did those look like, and use that for advocacy work. 4 years later, we've been doing it every year, and we've landed at a point this year where we had 4 years of comparable data, which is what we'll share with you in a bit. And so really for us, the purpose and goal of this survey is to just get a state of the sector, to get a pulse, to see how the sector is doing in one given snapshot or one given moment of time. And also give back to the sector high quality data, data that is broken down by various different types of organizations, regions, subsectors, data that is about the whole sector and relevant and gives a snapshot of how the sector is doing. And so the sector itself can use that for their advocacy efforts. For us over the years, the survey has meant it supports our policy work, really. Right in the immediate, it's supporting our work around the 2026 election, which is, fast approaching. It's also a way for us to measure what's happening with the sector over a long period of time. What are those some longer term trends, and what are some changes we're seeing in the sector? We actually had a moment this year where we're like, maybe we don't do the survey. We take a pause and sort of reflect. And the two biggest pieces of advice we got, one was you don't collect data just for the sake of it, but you collect data in the event that something changes, when, why, and how. And so that was really important for us. And as I shared, it contributes to our yearly policy priorities. So many folks fill out this survey. At the height of the pandemic, we had about 3,000 respondents. We're at about 1,400 this year. But nonetheless, so many folks fill it out and share information, share stories. And that for us is a way to really weave that into our policy priorities. Over the years, we've seen the nonprofit sector use the survey data in a variety of ways too, much of which I'll go over in a little bit. And for both of us, for all of us, really, it's a way to maintain a strong, resilient, and informed network. I think one of the most powerful things about the survey, which surprises me every year, really, is that no matter what subsector you're part of, no matter what region, what your sort of role in the ecosystem of our sector is across the province, everyone's experiencing the same thing. It's just maybe playing out differently, it's manifesting differently in different locations, but everyone's experienced the same thing. So there's this power in one single story about the sector, and how do we sort of mobilize around that and be heard around that? And so that's kind of where we've ended up with our survey over the years. We've gone from just having, one sort of technical report to having a whole suite of resources. And really, this is because we want to make it easy as possible for nonprofits, small, big, large, those that have lots of research capacity, those that don't, to engage with the survey and to really use it. As I shared, we really want to give back high quality data to the sector. So this year, these are the resources that we have. We have a bilingual data sheet, which is what I will go over in a couple of slides. It's in English and French. It's all on our website. I think we'll drop the link in the chat very soon. And this data sheet, what this looks like is all the questions on one side, and it's disaggregated by 12 different types, which I'll share. The bilingual public dashboard is sort of a visualization of the data sheet, which is what Marius will be showcasing. It's a bit easier to fiddle around with and gather the information that you need. The technical report gives data highlights for this year. So in this report, you'll see how did the sector respond to all the questions, where were there some significant changes in comparison to last year, who answered the questions, most, who didn't. It sort of gives a good snapshot of the highlights for this year. Our bilingual policy report is a bit different. It maps the 4-year trend. So as I shared, this year we were in an interesting space where we had 4 years of comparable data, particularly around the financial questions. And we had 2 years of data around the HR, volunteering, and impact on community section. And so it gave us an opportunity to look at what were the rate of change, who was answering what in which way over the past 4 years, and what are some of those broader trends. So that's what we share in our policy report, including our policy recommendations. And later on, in December, later on in the new year, we're hoping to do some deep dive blog series on different sections of the data. As you can imagine, there is so much information and there's so many different ways to slice and dice that information and share that information. I don't even think, we've sort of gone through all of it. We've gone through the main parts for sure. And so the deep dive helps us to sort of dive into that and give some more structured or more deep dives into information that the sector might find relevant that we haven't touched on in our tech report and our bilingual policy report. With that, I'm going to turn it over to my colleague Ebony, who's going to present our 4-year trends and analysis and projections.
Thank you, Pam. So hello to everyone. Thank you for joining us this afternoon. My name is Ebony David, and I'm the policy analyst here at ONN. So before we jump into the advocacy portion of the webinar, we want to take a few minutes to discuss some of the data that led us to realize why sector advocacy was so important in this moment right now. So as Pam noted, this was a year where we finally had enough data for some of our questions to start, some of our survey questions to start showing us trends in the data over a longer term period of time. One of the first trends we noticed, and I'm sure this isn't a surprise to a lot of you, is that demand for services is up. This number has increased from 47% in 2020 to 76% in 2023. In social services, as I'm sure a lot of you know, these organizations are the subsectors that are seeing the highest increase in demand, with 84% of these organizations experiencing an increase in demand. The second trend we saw was that nonprofits' financial situations are trending downward. Though we see marginal revenue increases, the nonprofits we see experiencing revenue increases are largely organizations with budgets over $3 million, and even then their revenue is slowing and failing to keep up with cost increases over time. 28% of respondents are reporting having to dip into reserve funds, and this is up from 25% in 2021. And probably the most worrisome statistic we saw was that optimism around how organizations are going to fare in the next 12 months is down to 25% in 2023 from 40% in 2021. The next section over the 4-year trends was the HR crisis, which continues to pose difficulties for the sector. 65% of respondents report still having difficulty with recruitment and retention. And despite this, there's still some positive news when it comes to the HR crisis and volunteerism. So on a more positive note, according to our data, the volunteer crisis is beginning to slow. So in 2022, 58% of respondents reported having difficulty recruiting volunteers. Now that number sits at about 42. And the number of organizations who experienced a complete loss of volunteers is down to just 37% from 62% in 2022. Now, these numbers are still quite high, but we're still hopeful that this trend ideally will continue downward as we continue going, taking the survey over the years. Finally, with cutbacks and waitlists and closures, they're staying relatively the same, with closures being at about 30%, cutbacks being at about, waitlists, being at about 20%. So we're seeing them remain the same. It's still relatively high though. And next slide, please. So as for what this data tells us, first, it's something we already know, but what the data makes crystal clear is that this is and therefore it's an excellent use for government advocacy, is that Ontarians are looking at nonprofits as a source of support through complex times. Secondly, nonprofits are more than other sectors in industry at the whims of their context. As community crisis increases and a demand increases in return, and not always with the additional support that we see that we need necessary, nonprofits are forced to adapt to these new situations. Broader economic uncertainty and austerity, as we're seeing now, means declining government funding and donations, which obviously makes situations a little harder to deal with for nonprofits. And lastly, if our data made anything more abundantly clear, it's that seeing steady increases in percentages around demand for services next to steady increases in percentages of programs being discontinued or nonprofits closing altogether, it's incredibly alarming. These closures end up meaning increased costs and demand for our communities, which further proves that every nonprofit closure leaves a tear in our social safety net. And before we move forward, I'd like to encourage people to, after throwing a bunch of numbers at you to put some questions in the chat if you have any analysis of your own and what this is telling you. We've heard from some people that the volunteer crisis is still not great for them, so we'd like to hear feedback on that as well. Next slide, please. So one of the new steps we took this year was with our 4 years of data, was to develop a formula that allowed us to look 4 years ahead and see what, with the data we have from the past 4 years, what it could potentially look like if nothing changes. So we looked at knowledge of nonprofit closures, demand for services, and increase in costs. And as you can see here, if nothing changes, the knowledge of nonprofit closures can go up to 63%, demand for services can go up to 100%, increase in costs can go up to 131%. These projections have become an even bigger incentive for us at ONN to do advocacy. We know there's no time to lose with these projections. We know that the situation is becoming untenable, and it's our duty to start raising alarm bells now. Next slide, please. So from all of this, our data, our projections, and our analysis, we came up with 5 policy recommendations. So first, what we've been saying for a few years now is to create a home in government. We're asking the government to give the sector a space to efficiently work with Ontario's 58,000 nonprofits and charity. We also want to future-proof Ontarian social infrastructure by addressing sustainability for all nonprofits receiving funding from government. We want to invest in nonprofits and grassroots groups serving equity-deserving communities, support the sector to build a resilient nonprofit workforce for the future with a labor force strategy and workforce development plan, and to modernize volunteerism. So that's what we're doing at ONN, and that's where this data brought us to. So I'm going to pass it back to Pam to discuss what this means for you and your organizations.
Thank you, Ebony. When we were planning this webinar, we went through a bunch of different options. And of course, one of them was, to just present you with the data. What does the data say? What are some of those statistics? But we know that many of you have probably already had time to delve into that. So what we wanted to spend more time on is how you can use the data. How can you leverage the data? And there's a variety of different ways to do that. So the survey report is out. Now what? What can you do as individual nonprofits in Ontario? So we don't want this to be an added burden. Often we talk a lot about advocacy, collective advocacy, and the feedback that we get back is, we're really busy. We're on the ground serving communities. There's multiple crises happening, and we're just trying to stay afloat. We don't have someone who could do, PR, advocacy, all of that work. So we really want you to think about the survey as something that's added into as another tool in your toolbox. Think about incorporating the survey into the work that you already are doing. So those are some of the ideas that I want to share with you today. But number one, we're always going to say is advocacy, advocacy, advocacy. It is so important for our elected officials to know how the sector is faring. New data, such as a survey, is an excuse to meet with government and to meet with your elected officials. So we recommend, share those findings with your local mayor, your city councilors, your local MPs, your MPPs, and really just talk about how they might be manifesting locally. Over and over again, we've heard, the survey is the highlights, the data, the stories are resonating. That is what many folks across the province are experiencing. And as I shared, probably with some nuances. So this is an opportunity to send that survey report to your elected officials and sort of add on, we'd love to chat about this. We'd love to talk about this. We're seeing a lot of this happen in our local community here. Here's story 1, here's story 2, here's story 3. And it doesn't just have to be one single organization. Perhaps you're part of a coalition, perhaps you're part of a committee or a working group in your region or in your subsector. And it might be a good way to come together and share that information. From personal experience, when we launched our survey, we sent it out to every cabinet minister, every deputy minister. And so we were really trying to make sure everyone on the political side and as well as on the public servant side and any MPPs that we had relationships with had access to this and had this information. And the uptake has been good, even if it's just been, 30-minute conversations about how the sector's doing. And even if it might be information that they might already know, it's sort of repeating information from from last year, it's been really, really important. And just, yes, Jim, I want to really underscore that as a provincial network, we for sure, bring that high level, big picture, and we're able to share that context piece. But the local is so, so important. The local is what brings to life a lot of these findings and a lot of these statistics that we're sharing. If we're sharing 76% of the sector reported an increase in demand for service this year, yet only 20% said that they can meet that demand, you as a local organization can probably really articulate what that really looks like in your organization. So really stressing, local is important. It's so important for you to get in front of your elected officials. And there is no harm in information sharing. And I would actually argue it's part of our mission and mandate as a sector. Another way to sort of use this information is thinking about internal advocacy. It's important, we can share it widely and broadly into the world, but it's so important for you to think about it, about educating your own board, maybe your own senior leadership, your staff, committees you're on, working groups, and even the communities that you work with. And it could be, these are survey findings that are relevant to us. You can pull out the ones for your subsector. You can pull out the ones, if you're a social enterprise, you can pull out the ones if you're from Halton region, for example, and say, hey, this is how our sector is faring. And this is in comparison to the provincial averages, or this is how Halton's doing. This is how the arts and culture subsector is doing in comparison to all of these. And you can draw all that data from the data sheet, the dashboard, and also, sorry, I'm reading the chat at the same time, as well as from all the other different resources we had to sort of pull that together. And we've heard folks do that who've sort of presented it to their board, especially if you're trying to make case for maybe a new program, for more resources, for staffing, or strategic direction that you want to take. There isn't a PowerPoint version of the report to use with board or staff meetings, but that's an excellent point that we can think about for next year for sure. But connect with us if that is something that's a need and that you think would be really great. Do connect with us. We can support that in some way, probably. Another great piece is convenings and gatherings. We can't underscore the importance of connecting, collaborating, and just sharing information. We've had a variety of requests from different regions to do presentations, different subsectors to do presentations on the survey. And what that means is really bringing people together to discuss what the survey findings are, provincially, what does the provincial landscape look like, and perhaps what's unique to that community, and to just discuss. And we'd love to hear from you, are these resonating? Are they making sense? And the analysis piece is so important in the sense, we know as much as we know, but you're on the ground, you can tell us why this is happening, and that why is so important to not just feed into the policy work that we're doing, but into our advocacy work to sort of share back, these are the numbers, and this is exactly why it's happening. This is what we're hearing. So for example, community development, Halton held a great event last Friday, invited us in to do a presentation. We presented Halton survey data, and then they all took some time to discuss each of the policy recommendations and sort of pull apart what didn't make sense, but also, what resonated, what they could pitch, what made sense to them locally. And that in of itself is such a great advocacy activity too. Another way to use some of this work is in your funding, grant applications, donor work, fundraising. There is a lot of data, as I shared, and much of this data can be used as evidence for your stories, your needs, your recommendations that you want to share. You can do provincial average, like I shared, or you can really drill down to the type of organization you are, if you're in rural, if you're francophone, if you have different language of operation, and really drill down and share what the state might be for your group of organizations. And this could be, we're experiencing all this demand and here are the numbers behind this, or we really need more resources in this space for HR and volunteers and staffing, and more broadly, here are the numbers to support that. That's one of the reasons actually why the survey's been so important, because there's not a lot of quantitative data about the whole sector, on how the sector operates. There's some really, strong subsector level data. There's some strong regional data here and there, but there's nothing out there, which is the gap that we're trying to fill, that gives you the whole picture about how the sector operates and how we do our work, which is so important to those stories and needs and recommendations. Another piece that's been floating around is engaging with media relations. We've sort of done this on our end, but encourage you to do it as well. You can write an op-ed, you can pitch a story to your local media, and the whole piece is about connecting the broader survey results to something that's happening locally. So definitely don't want this to be, another source of work. But if you're already doing something in the community, or if you're holding a fundraising event, I know Giving Tuesday was yesterday, or some holiday campaign, it's such an important time to also, contextualize, we're hosting this in this context, and this is the broader picture, and here are some numbers to support that. The local, again, is so important, and it just stresses that the survey isn't just about the GTA or just about the Toronto, but all of the province. And to make it really easy, and just if you have the only capacity to share, we've put together an amplification package, which we can drop in the chat as well. And here we have some ready-made communication assets, from survey findings, data, statistics, that you can simply plug into your newsletters and social media. That's been the other powerful thing, is to see others amplify and push the same data, the same story around the tipping point, the same key messages that we have, and also the value of the sector. So if you've had a chance to look through the report, it is doom and gloom, but we also have a section around the value of the sector, because we really want that to be out front and center. Even though we're struggling, we're so important in communities, and we want to be able to tell that one single story. So the amplification package helps with that as well. I also want to spend some time just talking about the current advocacy opportunity. Pre-budget 2024, it really did sneak up on us quite quickly this year, and so I just want to spend a bit of time, because this is the current opportunity that's in front of us right now, and this is for the province. So provincial budget consultations are really critical for us as a sector, whether you're a small organization or big, you're in rural Ontario or urban, and doesn't matter which subsector you're a part of. It's really in a critical time to highlight our priorities, your priorities as an organization, what you're seeing on the ground in your communities, as your subsector. And usually many of you pull that from your provincial associations who are doing some amazing work, and maybe, broader sectoral priorities and community priorities. And that's sort of where we come in. We have a lot of our pre-budget will be based on broader sector priorities. We'll be sharing that out very soon, probably in the next week or so. And it's a time to sort of amplify that too. The more people saying the same thing, and in a unified sort of collective way, while still, whatever's unique to your organization and your subsector and your community, the stronger it is, the more people saying that. I forgot to mention also on the other previous slide, the more people that bring up the same issue to different MPs and MPPs, they have to then bring it up into the House of Commons, to their legislature, because there's many people bringing that issue up, and many MPPs, and then they're able to share information and cross-pollinate. So it's never a waste of time to bring up the issue to our elected officials. There's a couple of ways you can participate this year. And like I said, because it's happening so quickly, we did want to make sure we spent some time on this. Right now, the Minister of Finance and the Parliamentary Assistant are touring the province with in-person consultations. These are not public information about when and who and how, but there is a way to participate. You can express interest to participate in this. And I've put the email up top here. Some in the sector have already been getting invitations to attend this. So if you're a local network, I know some of you have already gotten your invites. This is such an important time to get up in front of our Minister of Finance and our elected officials and share the story of the sector. And like I said, you can share the broad sector survey results that we have, the broad key messaging, and then really add in your own nuance based on your community and your organization. And that's happening right now. That will probably end right before the holidays. Another way to sort of participate in this process, a more formal way, is to submit a written submission. And so the deadline for this is January 31st, 2024. And there's, it does seem sometimes daunting to be like, we're going to put together this whole submission and put that in. But there's so many ways to do it. You can copy and paste ours, and you can copy and paste many that are out there, whether they're for a region or a subsector from a provincial association, etc. And those are probably all going to be coming out very soon. So copy and paste, and or maybe just send in a letter to be like, hey, we endorse this budget submission, this budget submission, this budget submission. It's a really good documenting exercise. We want to be on record, even if we're saying the same thing and we're saying it over and over again. We want to be on record to say the sector's not doing well and we need support. You can also appear in front of standing committee, particularly the Standing Committee on Finance and Economic Affairs, during public hearings and consultations. So these are public. We will share that link probably in the chat as well. And these, you can apply to be part of these public hearings. And there's a deadline for each city. They're touring everywhere, like I said, across the GTA, across the province. And again, another really great opportunity to get up in front of elected officials and share how you're doing, how your organization is doing, how your community is doing, and share some sector priorities as well. And I'm going to stress that the deadlines are coming up fast for each city. They like to, I think, plan 2 to 3 weeks ahead of time. And so if you're interested, please do that. And we need more representation. We need more people about the sector, from the sector, talking about the sector in these spaces. I always like to share the story. Last year, we did our standing committee presentation on the last day at the last possible time, because that's what we got. And we were in the room with Craft Brewers of Ontario and Hospice Ontario, and I can't remember who the other organization was. Every MPP in that room could name or could tangentially name a craft brewery in their riding. And that was a big aha moment for us. Wouldn't it be amazing if they could name a nonprofit that they're connected to, or that they volunteer with, or that they donate to, or that they know is doing some really great work? And time again, we always get folks, or rather elected officials, reaching out, who's a nonprofit in my riding and who does this and who can I connect with? And that for us is a signal, right, to strengthen those relationships locally. I'm just gonna monitor the chat quickly. Yes, also a good point. Don't forget to highlight the opportunity costs of not having your services around. And just quickly, on our pre-budget this year, we thought, long and hard, what do we do? What do we do? What do we say? And I'm really excited about the framing that we've taken. We've taken a note from our survey, definitely using the same strong language that we're at a tipping point. The time is now. It's our turn to invest in the sector. And if you don't, our projections are not looking great, and they're looking quite scary. And we're so valuable to communities in Ontario. And so I'm hoping folks can latch onto that and use that in their submissions as well. And that ties back to, if we're not around, if our sector's not around, what does that mean for communities in Ontario? What would they look like? Did you ask any questions on survey on effectiveness of pre-budget submissions? No, we didn't, because that was not in the scope of our survey, but I'll go through the questions in a little bit and I can share that. Oh, there's Q&A box. Okay, maybe I'll wait to do that afterwards, but I will continue with the presentation. So using the data to support your stories and recommendations is a sort of third piece of information I want to leave you with. As I shared, we've put a lot of effort into making sure our survey resources are accessible and as high quality as they can be. So this year we have public bilingual data sheets and dashboards. And the dashboards really visualize the data sheets. And they're all set up in a way to ensure the data collected is accessible for you to all use. So a couple of notes on this. Each question in the data sheet is disaggregated by 10 types. So you can look at who answered that question based on budget size, language of operation, region, the 6-7 regions we've divided it up into, the 10 subsectors, if they identify as a Black-led, Black serving, Black focused, or a B3 organization, Indigenous serving, Indigenous-led, Indigenous focused, Indigenous benefiting, or partnership, or an I4 organization. And this year, we added a third way to identify, and that was if there were a 2SL LGBTQIA+ led, focused, or serving, or all of the above. Also rural, you can see how all nonprofits in rural communities answered each question, the type of operation, so if they're a nonprofit, charity, both, grassroots, etc., and if they're paid staff or not. So we really wanted to make sure we were able to reflect the volunteer sector as well. There are 6 sections to the survey. There's the organizational information, so that's the who filled it out portion. There's the operations, and that's where you'll find the demand for services questions, the if folks are collecting data, how well they're prepared for emergencies, etc. There's the finances section, and this is a section that has stayed consistent over the past 4 years. And then we have the staff and volunteer section, which we introduced last year. We also have a looking ahead section, and an impact piece. And this is just what is the impact of how the sector is doing on the communities we serve. We've also included in these open data sheets answers to some of our open-ended questions. One was, what are other issues the sector is facing? And that can be disaggregated by location and budget size, so you can really hone into perhaps what folks said in your region. And if you were a dreamer and you had unlimited resources, what would you implement? That's also open for folks to look at. The data sheet also comes with all the provincial averages over the past 4 years. So you can sort of compare year over year, but you can also compare your, let's say, if you're social services, the way that your subsector answered that question in comparison to the provincial averages over the past 4 years. And we always feel like everyone knows this, but please copy and paste whatever is relevant from all of our resources. Our tech report, our policy report, the messaging, the words that we've used, all of that is so it's all there for you to copy and use however you can. With that, I just want to share a bit on the open data sheet. So if you just bear with me. I know the first time I looked at this data sheet a couple years ago, I found it quite intimidating. But I just want to make sure that, and I want to highlight some questions which I think are really good to use for your recommendations and the stories that you might want to tell. So this is our data sheet. This is the first section around organizational information. And then these tabs are what the provincial averages are over the past 4 years for those questions, which is why it's been so important for us to remain consistent in asking those questions. So you might be like, oh, well, this doesn't really make sense anymore. This doesn't really flow. It's intentional. We want to make sure we have comparable data. And then on this side is all the different types that I shared. So type of staff, type of operation, rural, if they're 2SL LGBTQIA+, subsectors, all of that. So you can see how they answered all those questions. And then sort of moving into the operations piece, some of the really key questions here that are important that you can use for evidence is around, where's the data? This one, the level of preparedness. There's an emergency grant actually out right now that you can apply for from the provincial government. And this is, straight out of the survey, you can say how prepared your region or your subsector might be to manage an emergency if it were to come up. So you would sort of, let's say Central Ontario, 33% said they're very prepared, higher than the provincial average of 29%. You could even pull, if you're looking at small organizations under 500,000, not surprisingly, only 15% of them are very prepared compared to 29% across the province. and 26% are not prepared. These increase in demand questions are also really great. Over the years, we have always asked about increase in demand for services. So that's why you'll see these numbers populated, where you'll see sort of these dashes. That means we didn't have that option available for those years. And so again, like you can see what the provincial averages are and then pull, let's see, let's do Northern Ontario. 69% are experiencing demand. And where you'll see them sort of highlighted in green, that's because community researchers have been wonderful in just wanting to point out that is a higher number or a lower number compared to all the other numbers in that row. This year we asked 2 new questions around demand, which might be helpful, and that is how much of an increase in demand. So when we say 76% have seen an increase in demand, we don't know how much what that demand looks like. So this question number 22 is how much of that demand, how much has increased? And question number 23 is if they're able to meet demand. So you could tell a really interesting story. Let's say if we have Peel, 84% of the sector in Peel is experiencing demand for services, much higher, probably consistently high over the past years. And most of them are experiencing an up to 50% increase. And then you can just go down. 14% said they can't. 22%, sorry, said they can't meet the demand. And that's a story right there to talk about demand for services for a particular region in this case. The next section is around finances. And I'm watching the time, so I'm going to be quick. But the really good questions here to lean on are financial forecasting. So this is about, how long can organizations forecast sustainability for themselves? And you can see the numbers for if it's, broken down, but more than a year and then less than a year. The other really good question to sort of lean on here is the costs one. How many are experiencing an increase in costs? So 90% across the province, and then you can see based on others, how much change in expenses are there. And moving into, these are the questions about the reserve funds, which is also really important to highlight how many are dipping into that. The revenue question is always interesting, and we've highlighted it throughout, but you can sort of see for your, let's say if you're in, maybe if you're in the environmental sector, right? 57% said they saw an increase in revenue. Most of them saw just, under 50%. And then you can compare that to provincial averages. And then you can also see how many saw a decrease in revenue, 29% adding those up. The HR section can give you a sense of job vacancy rates, again, by whichever way you want to disaggregate or just by this provincial average. This year we have included, the 0% option. So really we're able to say 56% of the sector has some sort of job vacancy rate this year. And then you can compare it to your subsector. This one is around ability to recruit and retain staff. Why are we not able to? Which is a really good question to highlight. And we wanted to sort of also capture what folks were implementing. So that's another, if you want to sort of demonstrate we are doing something, the sector is doing something, but perhaps it's not enough. So this question can be helpful there. And we asked something around skills shortage as well. And volunteerism here. And I think I will pause there, but I just wanted to, give everyone sort of a breakdown of what this data sheet looks like and how you can use it and compare and pull out the data for yourself. And with that, I'm going to stop sharing and I'm going to ask Marius, who developed our public dashboard, to sort of walk us through that.
Thank you. Hi, I'm going to share a screen too. Let me know when that pops up. Okay. Can you see my screen?
Yep, you're good.
Okay. So as Pamela mentioned, we created, this is the first attempt, like based on data for this year, to create 2 dashboards that are presenting in a more graphical way the results of those data sets that are mentioned in those spreadsheets. I assume the link to the page where the survey results is posted in the chat. And if you scroll to the bottom of the page, there is a section which is called Report Resources, and the third bullet points will be the data dashboards. There are two versions, an English and a French version. If you click on the link, you will be taking, let's say we'll click on the English one, you will be taking to a landing page. We try to structure the dashboard in a similar way, like that data sheet is structured, and also following the questions that were asked in the survey. So we will find a couple of sections. Each and one of them has their own page. One way to navigate, you can see in each one of them, you have an orange bookmark. If you click on that orange bookmark, you will be taken to that page. Another way of navigating or going back to the landing page, at the bottom, there is a 12 of 11 number. If you click on that, you will have all the pages of the survey, and then you'll go back to the table of contents. You will be taken back to that. Similar information is presented also in French. So let's just get to one of the pages. So this one, it's basically information about the organization, and all these items are then filtering items for the other chapters of the survey. How to read this? Basically, these are the provincial averages. If you wanna look at a certain subsector, you just click on the certain subsector, let's say arts and culture, and then whatever you see, it is the breakdown on those categories for that specific sector. Click back on it again, and you will be taken to the normal. If you want to see a sector, and let's say if they are working in a rural location, you have to click on the sector, then press Control and click on the rural location that you wanna you see, and the way you will read the information will be breakdowns on these items on organizations that are serving the arts and culture, and they are also serving a rural location. I assume it's pretty straightforward. There is also some I don't know, indication, some guidance at the bottom of the page. So as I mentioned, if you want to go to the table of contents, under each page, we've listed what type of information you will be able to find. And then let's say we are going to the operation page. These were the questions that were asked under the operations. And on the right side, you have some filters. So if you want to see what's happening in, let's say, Central Ontario, you just hover over that slicer, select Central Ontario, and then the information that is displayed on the page will be for Central Ontario. In a similar way, if you want to cross-reference with other type of stuff, you can also select another slicer, and the information will be displayed for Central Ontario and organizations that have paid staff. I assume it's the same way. If you want to clear all the filters, you just hover over the filter and there is an eraser. You can clear the selection. Similar stuff in here. You can clear the selection and will revert back to the provincial averages. I'll go back to the table of contents. So each page will have those 11 filters on it. The structure is following the same structure of the data spreadsheets that you've seen before. The only thing we have only 2023 information. Probably next year, if we'll get new data, we'll be able to append it to this one and start building a trend. It is what it is. It's our first attempt, and also it's our first attempt of posting on a public website, the dashboard on a public website. Do you have any questions? I assume it's pretty straightforward and there will be no issues in accessing the dashboards and playing around with them.
Thank you, Marius. We appreciate that for sharing
Problem.
that. And yes, if there's any questions, please leave them in the chat and we can
Okay,
ask.
I'll then stop sharing the screen.
Thank you. And with that is our formal presentation, but we're happy to sort of answer questions now. I know there's a couple in the chat and in the Q&A box. So maybe I'll take the first one. And then Ebony, do you want to take the second one?
In the Q&A box?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So Heather asked, have you considered augmenting your results using open source T3010 data? You've used that for research projects particularly. And what I will say about that is that we just don't have the capacity. As I shared, we started doing this survey really just during the pandemic, wanting to know what the state of the sector was. And we've sort of just been building off of that format over the last couple of years. And like I said, it's a whole of a village approach, and it's one of many other things that we do as well. We know there's various ways that the work could be augmented. And so we're actually in the process of planning sort of what that high level strategy for our survey going forward looks like, especially since we are now going to commit to doing it every year. And what falls into our, what we can do with our capacity. We're a very small team, and with the resources that we have. That's not to say, we encourage many other folks to take the data and run with it. If there's some interesting things that you can do with it and add to it, that's super helpful, and share it back with us for sure.
And I'll take Daniel's question. So Daniel asks, a question for you, where do you get your information about nonprofits closing? So obviously we can't reach people who have closed and shuttered their doors, that those people are not filling out our survey. But the last question in our survey, one of the last questions is, are you aware of other organizations from the same sector as you that have permanently closed? And then we put a date. So we put April 1st, 2022, between April 1st, 2022 to March 31st, 2023. And we've been asking that for a couple of years now, since 2021. And slowly that number is increasing every time as people are noticing their partners or community organizations that are similar to them also closing their doors. So that's where we get that data from.
Great. And then there's a question around breakdown of data by subsector. And so what we shared in the data sheet in the public dashboard, there is that breakdown by subsector. In the dashboard, as Marius shared it, and in the data sheet, the breakdown of data by subsector is only for 2023. So actually, if you go back into our webpage that has all our resources, we actually uploaded all of the data sheets for every year. So if you're interested in going through like the 2020, 2021 or 2022 data in comparison, you can see that. I know normally in the past we've sort of done analysis specifically just by regions and subsectors. We took a bit of a different approach this year. We did it based on the different questions and sections we had. So in the tech report, we definitely do apply that lens. We looked at every question and said, who said what from each subsector and region, budget size, and other types of organizations, and what does that look like? So that's how we sort of broke it down there as well. So I don't know if that's kind of the question or answer you were looking for, but yeah, anything to add to that, Ebony, in terms of subsector breakdowns?
No, I think that's good. Yeah, I think you can see the subsector breakdowns really well in the data sheet, but also the dashboard is a great way to piece through the different ways they interact with one another and the different regions and different amount of funding they receive. So yeah.
And then just depending on, again, capacity, we do want to mobilize as many all the results we can, and we've been doing a lot of presentations over the last couple of months. And so and looking at my art comms team, we might maybe publish some of that stuff because we have been pulling out some regional data and subsector data that's been interesting, so we can share that too. Just going through the chat. Yes, I just want to underscore what Maria said. This is the first time we've delved into any sort of public dashboard stuff. And so we're very grateful for that support, and also open to feedback around it too. We think depending on the usability and how many people access it, and if it's a good use, we want to continue building on the dashboards. Any feedback around that would be greatly appreciated. Okay, and then why are there only Indigenous and Black ethno-racial breakouts, especially when we know that West Arab and Korea have the highest rates of poverty in the province? That's a good question. So we actually never did that. We used to only break down by populations in our earlier surveys. And what we noticed with that breakdown was that it wasn't helpful in the sense every organization would select that they serve every population. So we wouldn't really get any information out of that. And rightfully so, right? Many folks service many different communities that come through their door. And so what we wanted to start doing was really think about who's left out of policy conversations, decision making from a sector perspective. So, and for us, that we saw that was a lot of our partners in Black-led, Black-focused, Black-serving organizations, in I4 serving-led focused organizations that were led, focused, and serving, but were not part of policymaking conversations or not in those decision-making spaces. And when we did do sector-wide data work, those nuanced impacts and realities weren't depicted. So that's why we started including 2 years ago or last year, the ability for organizations to identify them as such. This year, we included 2SL for the same reason. We really want to be able to capture and highlight the differential impacts on those organizations and communities that they serve, as well as their workers. And it's about definition, really. We were really grateful that we could rely on C to have that definition around B3, the circle where we borrow the definitions for I4, and for the Enchante network where we borrow the definitions around 2SL, LGBTQIA+. We are playing around with hopefully having more concrete definition around women's organizations or feminist organizations to also sort of highlight the differential impacts there. We're on this journey. We haven't explored what other types we can identify. So that's a great point, Michael. We can sort of think about perhaps is there a way to identify ethno-specific or ethno-cultural organizations and sort of pull out some of that data that might be the differential impacts on them as well. So something to think about for sure for next year. Who is not represented in the data? That's a really good question. Who's not? Well, I think starting with those that close, as Ebony was sharing, closures are at an all-time high. 35% of the sector knows someone who was shut down just over the last year, and we'll never know, we get some information, folks sharing, really emailing us and letting us know in our conversations, but other than that, we don't usually know who's shut down and who's closed, and what service has been lost, right? Sometimes that service or that program can be taken up by another organization in a neighboring area, but sometimes not. And so we'll never be able to quantify that. So that for sure, I think, is missing in the data. We can only do our best to describe the closures. I think smaller organizations probably, I'm looking at Ebony, we've been going over this data many, many months. A surprising, or maybe not so surprising, trend we've seen over the past couple of years is that even though it's equally distributed across budget size for this year, over the years, more and more of the bigger organizations, like 1 million, 3 million, 10 million plus budget sizes, are filling out the survey, and the small ones are less likely to fill it out. Those numbers are going down. And so for us, that's a red flag, because we want to be able to make sure we capture particularly, organizations that are small or to mid-size, who might not have capacity and resources, and make sure that we're reflected in the data. And so sort of thinking about that they might not be represented as best as we want, for sure. Ebony, any thoughts on your end?
I was going to say small volunteer, totally volunteer run organizations are probably one that I worry about a little bit, because there's so many questions we have about numbers that sometimes people can not know that stuff and they won't take the survey. So that's something we took into consideration when writing our report, that sometimes those organizations just don't have capacity to fill out our survey, and so we miss seeing what they have to say sometimes. But I wanted to say, I saw Michael Chu, your comment about using Statistics Canada's. I'll definitely write that down and think about it. It's interesting.
Yeah, and we're again at an exciting time where I think we could probably play around with our questionnaire a lot more this year. We were in 2024, we were intentional not to do it now because we didn't want to mess up the comparable data. But now that we've sort of done that for 4 years, which again paints a really interesting picture of the sector through the pandemic and coming out of it, that we might be able to sort of play around with that. We do use some similar questions from StatsCan, categories and definitions, but we're also mindful that they don't always capture the sector. So we've kept the subsector divisions the same, but we are thinking perhaps we can change the regions around, maybe get a bit more granular in that. So yeah, definitely something to think about for sure. Oh, and to include all 11 regions listed in Q3 of the data set in the dashboard. It should be there. So
Let me share the screen.
okay, areas.
Okay, so share. Okay, so it is in here. If you scroll down, Niagara, it's there as a region.
Perfect. Yeah.
And it should be the same across all the pages. You just have to scroll down. Once you click on this, scroll down using your mouse, and you can select the region that you want to look.
Perfect. Thanks,
Did
Marian.
I answer your question?
If they're still, they'll let us know. I just realized it's 2:01. Thank you so much for joining us today. And perhaps the last thought that we want to leave you with is the data and the survey is only as good as the people filling it out. We don't want to end up in a situation where everybody loves the survey, but no one fills it out because we won't have the data. So I encourage you all to really, really share it widely, use it, leverage it, tell us how you're using and leveraging it, and keep all of this energy in mind when we release the next survey to be filled out, hopefully May of 2024. The more people we have filling it out, the more nuance we can get, the more data that we will have, and better for you to all leverage as well. If you have any other questions, feel free to connect with Ebony or myself or anyone at ONN, and we're happy to chat. If there are folks who want some regional presentations or subsector presentations, also reach out. We're more than happy to do that. Yes, have a lovely rest of your day. Stay safe, stay healthy, and happy holidays, if it's not too soon to say that.